afternoon, Bangkok, and welcome back to TikTok with me on March 25, 2024. The headline for today is about Japanese immigration to the United States of America from the past up until present. Let's take a live look and catch up in some more detail. Kiki, are you with us?
Okay, thank you, Fa. This is Kiki Live Report from Kyoto. So you guys know that one of the greatest Asian ethnic group in America who immigrated and settled in the Pacific coast of Hawaii is actually Japanese. So today we're going to look through the history, facts, and journey of Japanese immigration in the US. The relationship between the United States of America and Japan began around 150 years ago. The beginning of their relationship was the arrival in Japan of the Black Ships commanded by Commodore Matthew Perry. He was an American military leader who came as a representative in 1853. Both countries signed a contract for the Treaty of Peace and Amity in the next year. Since then, the United States of America and Japan have had a good bond with frequent exchange in various areas and strong cooperation. Even if each of them had awful experiences in the World War II, currently, their politics and economics are stronger than ever. In 1868, it was the year that Meiji Restoration happened. It was the event of political revolution that brought the age of the Tokugawa shogunate, which was a military government, and returned to the imperial rule of Matsuhito or Imperial Meiji. It was the transit from the Edo period to the Meiji period. On January 3rd of 1868, a rebellion took place in Kyoto, or the former imperial capital of Japan, which served as the actual restoration event. Rapid urbanization and industrialization in Japan after that led to the severe social upheaval and a decline in architecture. Therefore, they increasingly searched for a better living outside of their native islands, as the farmers were forced to leave their land and employees were made jobless by a foreign competition. Also, when Japanese salaries fell and news of the growing of US economy circulated, they aimed to seek opportunities in the United States instead. Now, the first generation of Japanese people who immigrated to the US was called Issei. A young Japanese men in their 20s and 30s initially arrived in search of employment as loggers, railroad workers, salmon canners, and agricultural laborers. They mostly came from the Japanese regions such as Okayama, Fukuyama, Hiroshima, Wakayama, and Kyushu. In the beginning of 1885, there was a significant increase in Japanese immigration to Hawaii and the United States, primarily as a result of Japan's government relaxing its immigration laws. The existence of plantation culture made Hawaii become the first American territory to become a major immigration hub for Japanese immigrants, and as a result, it underwent significant changes. Now, the large populations in Hawaii were looking for plantation workers. In the 1880s, Hawaii was still decades away from gaining status. It wouldn't become a US territory formally until the 90s. Nonetheless, big American-based corporations, many of which were sugar plantations, control a large portion of its economy and the daily lives of its citizens. Up until 1900, the plantation owners had complete control over the lives of the laborers. Plantation workers were tied by 3 to 5 year contracts. and any who search the property risks going to jail. Many Japanese immigrants found the unrelenting labor and impersonal appetite of industrial agriculture intolerable because they had farmed their own family farms back home. Before their contract expired, many fled to their mainland. And more than that, Hawaii presented the Japanese immigrants with challenging circumstances. They were mistreated, unaccustomed to the temperature, and the cost of things exceeded what their pay could cover. To negotiate the immediate return of some and the return after contract completion at the expense of the Hawaiian government for others. The government of Japan dispatched a representative. After the accident, the Japanese government for almost 2 decades declined to deploy migrant workers aboard. And during this time, there was the Iceland's first multi-ethnic labor union, or the Hawaii Laborers Association, which was formed by Japanese organizers, along with the Filipinos, Chinese, Spanish, and Portuguese laborers. Moreover, they had to contend with European American proprietors in order to obtain pay and the acceptable standard for living. The isolation and fear of racial violence that many Japanese immigrants on the West Coast experienced were not issues for the Japanese in Hawaii nowadays. Honolulu still remains the metropolitan city which has the most Japanese population. And on the US side, the immigration timeline began much slower compared to Hawaii. The early immigrants settled in small settlements within small towns and larger cities, such as the Japantown in San Francisco, as well as along the Pacific coast. The initial immigrants frequently chose farm work, but they were also present in lumbering towns and mining camps, also within the well-known general stores, restaurants, and small hotels. At the turn of century, a 25-year period of immigration that witnessed the arrival in the United States of more than 100,000 Japanese people began. At this time, many of the institutions that serve as the cornerstone of Japanese American communities were also established. Besides this, due to the government's implementation of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, forbade the entry of any Chinese workers, leading to the labor crisis in states like California. Many of the ISIS settled down in the West Coast area during this time. At first, these arrivals worked mostly migrant laborers in the farms, mines, canneries, and the railroad of the American West. Eventually, this seems to be involved in the labor agitation of this period. However, many were able to start their own companies at first, providing Japanese restaurants, boarding homes, and shops for the requirements of their own neighborhood. But very quickly, the chains of department stores and traders that cater to the border population is now opened. Japanese cooperative societies like the Japanese organizations provide financial assistance and management guidance to such businesses. Many Japanese farmers practice time-consuming, labor-intensive techniques for their native country. They were able to purchase their own land and start prestigious farming enterprises.
Japan agreed to restrict the quantity and kind of Japanese immigrations to the United States in 1907, when the two countries signed the renowned Gentleman's Agreement, which was the main cause of the immigrants' problems. It allowed only the educated to immigrate, limiting the flow of both skilled and unskilled laborers. Surprisingly, there were now more Japanese immigrants than before. Marriage remained the main way for women to enter the country, and the ongoing influx of Japanese picture brides increased the number of Japanese citizens by birth, as well as by new immigration. Women who wanted to immigrate to the United States were able to do so by creating marital ties far away, and Japanese workers in America were able to find partners of their own nationalities. Taking the picture brides as evidence, anti-Japanese groups claimed that the gentleman's agreement was being violated. This eventually resulted in the 1913 California Alien Land Law, which prohibited Japanese land ownership. Following the First World War, reactionary nativism became the dominant political movement in America. Many groups of minority were under attack. Non-white immigrants were solely seen by Americans as alien forces. The establishment of the Japanese town that emerged from critical employment discrimination and real estate covenants were called Nihonmachi. With the formation of Nihonmachi, easier constructed businesses, Buddhist temples, and Japanese Christian churches. Japanese were lured out of the city to serve as laborers on the railways, oil fields, canneries, and farms. Fishing-related industries also grew. Numerous Japanese people migrated to San Joaquin Valley, where they were successful in cultivating crops like potatoes, asparagus, onions, and other ones in previously uncultivated land. The international district's Chinese establishment was closely followed by Japanese settlement and business expansion. It is understandable that the Chinese and Filipinos would hold a certain resentment towards the Japanese, given that their nations were targets of growing Japanese imperialist aggression in Asia during the first half of the 20th century. Still, there were many conflicts between ethnic groups in this area. Business groups with ethnic roots in China and Japan disagreed sometimes on particular land use matters. But they knew, in the end, they would have to work together to keep the international district free from mainstream commercial development. Later, there was the Immigration Act of 1924, a movement to completely prevent Japanese immigrants gradually gained traction. It appears that the first generation of Japanese immigrants would also be the last. But as the aspirations of upcoming immigrants were shattered, a new generation of Japanese Americans were emerging. Around the 1930s, it was the period of the second generation of Japanese immigrants who were American-born. They were known for the name Nisei. The Nisei was Americans by birth, citizens of the United States, and tend to speak more English than Japanese. They were also more likely to practice Christianity rather than Buddhism. They are more likely to favor American culture than Japanese tradition or their parents, including food, sports, music, and social activities. Many of them found it difficult to balance the contradictory demands of their varied cultural heritage. Later on, during the Second World War period, Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 did have a significant impact on the Japanese community. With the signing of Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Japanese immigrants and their Nisei children were quickly relocated to internment camps for the war's entirety. Japanese Americans were given a week to register with the government, gather any jobs they might have, and report to a nearby assembly facility after receiving an exclusion order. Homeowners and business owners were forced to sell their properties at low prices in order to meet the refugees' deadline for a few days to sell their assets. Many people slept in stables or animal stalls while waiting to be transferred to their designated internment camps at the assembly centers, which were typically repurposed racetracks and fairgrounds. In the camp, physical mistreatment was uncommon, but the armed guards and ever-present snipers in the observation towers served as continual reminders of the residents' new status. They had to sleep in barracks or tiny compartments without running water, eat in large mess halls, and go public with the majority of their daily affairs. The internment camps eventually set up their own schedules. Children were sent to school every morning, and adults were given chores to complete, which usually involved farming or maintaining the physical infrastructure. After the Japanese surrendered in August 1945, many Japanese American families relocated to the West Coast, while others moved to the city in Midwest, including Chicago, Salt Lake City, and Denver, and East Coast, such as New York City, where there remained a significant portion of the population. And in 1946, the camp was finally closed. Japanese immigration did not recommence until the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, or the McCarran-Walter Act, which eliminated the barrier against aliens who were ineligible for citizenship as a condition of entry. President Truman was concerned about the decisions to maintain the national origins quota system and to establish racially constructed quotas for Asian nations. He thought the new law was discriminatory and vetoed it, but it got enough support in Congress to override his veto.
Now, to Americans, the Japanese are generally viewed in the positive aspects, such as hardworking, inventive, and honest. These are the terms what Americans use to describe Japanese people. In fact, more than 9 in 10 Americans used to say that they had been associated hardworking with the Japanese. Most Americans do not really regard various negative stereotypes to the Japanese. Only 36% view them as intolerant. Another 31% see them as aggressive. And just only 19% associate them with the term selfish. The Japanese offer a more mixed assessment of Americans. However, they see Americans as inventive, but also aggressive, and relatively few think of Americans as hardworking and honest. And although the United States is a multi-ethnic country, which has more contact with foreigners than Japan, the Japanese stereotypes held by American people are also influenced by general images, not by actual intergroup contact. There are Americans who personally think of Japanese in terms of positive stereotypes, such as that Japanese are intelligent, industrious, progressive, and quiet, even though they do not have many contacts with Japanese. There was also a study conducted after the World War II, indicating that the personal belief of American college students regarding Japanese was affected by the political climate, such as their enemy. The study showed a negative shift in Japanese stereotypes, such as imitative and extremely nationalistic. Later on, in the late 60s, the negative stereotypes were found to decline, with Americans seeing Japanese as industrious, ambitious, and effective, which was influenced by the rapid development in the Japanese industry. The younger generation of Americans born after 1946 had fewer and more positive stereotypes of Japanese than they actually did in the generation born before World War II. But American people still show negative social distance toward Asians. Therefore, even if Americans have positive stereotypes toward Japanese, they still have prejudice toward Asians. This may perhaps because of the lack of actual context between each other.
English was hard for them, especially on the telephone. And
Moreover, there's a stereotype of the super achiever, and these people were called super Japs. And in that way, Japanese Americans are very Japanese. This means they are very goal oriented. Also, they are very achievement oriented, and they are very society oriented. The stereotype of Japanese people through the perspective of the American is also reflected in the media such as film or series. For example, the movie named Memories of a Geisha. This is a 2005 American epic period drama directed by Rob Marshall and was actually adapted from 1997 novel of the same name by Arthur Golden. The Memories of Geisha tells the story of a young Japanese girl named Shiyo Sakamoto, who is sold by her impoverished family to a geisha house, or what Japanese people would call okiya, to support them by training as and eventually becoming a geisha under the fake name Sayuri Nita. Also, this film was the portrayal of the Japanese. Around half of the cast were from China and the other Asian countries. Even with the cast of Chayo, or the protagonist of the movie, she was portrayed by the Chinese actress Xi Yiyang. It can presumably reflect some prejudice through the casting of how the Western view of Asians, as if they are all the same. Now, we're moving on to the Japanese cultural influence that they brought to America. Firstly, they confidently brought their customs with them to their new location. On Everly Plantation, Buddhist temples increasingly grew, many of which had a resident Buddhist priest. The entire plantation system observed the Ubon, or Festival of the Soul, in midsummer holiday. All employees stopped working on November 3rd, beginning in the 1880s when Japanese laborers actually celebrated the birthday of Japanese emperor. Secondly, the Japanese American Courier, the first local newspaper in English, was published and sponsored by its highly educated population. Now, moving on to one of the Japanese person that you guys should know. James Sakamoto was a major figure in the establishment of Japanese baseball and basketball organizations. Former boxer Sakamoto lost his sight but was able to continue publishing the newspaper with the help of his wife, Misao Sakamoto. In the lack of other popular social outlets, youth sports teams offer excitement and identity affirmation. They competed against Japanese teams from other cities, and even Japan, with Sakamoto playing a key role in the organization. But in addition to American athletics, the study of traditional Japanese martial arts encouraged adherence to the Japanese imperial idea. According to this, traditional masters from Japan taught judo, or kendo, which is a swordsmanship fought with bamboo, and kyodo. The Japanese Association also acted as the official agency for immigration affairs and was partially supported by the Emperor of Japan. It provided funding for the Japanese language schools that many Nisei Americans were forced to attend after school or on the weekends. In Seattle, the prefectures of Okayama, Hiroshima, Wakayama, and Kumamoto were mostly represented by kenjakai, where Issei immigrants frequently founded and joined prefectural societies for mutual aid in times of illness or death, as well as for all forms of the misfortunes. They acted as social service agency and welcoming committees. Furthermore, throughout the poetry, Shinkin Kabuki Theater, and traditional dance and music performances, the Japanese soon enriched their cultural life. At Yesler, way on Washington Street, the Nippon Kan Theater served as the venue for the majority of these cultural activities. Undoubtedly, the Nippon Kan would be a warm venue for Japanese performance on tour.
The Japanese Progressive Citizens League was established in 1921, and when a national convention was held in Seattle in 1930, it changed the name to the Japanese American Citizens League, or JACL, and the founders were Nisei. Throughout the first 10 years of JACL, it focused on proving that Japanese Americans were true Americans, and also quietly denouncing policies and legislation that discriminated against Asian Americans. Comes to the point when the Japanese ethnicity has influenced the popular media in the United States. The very first and one of the few Asian actors to become famous in the United States was Setsuo Hayakawa. Hayakawa is best known for his role as Colonel Saito in the film The Bridge on the River Kwai.
Oh, quiet.
My orders are to complete the bridge by the 12th day of May. Time is short. I have only 12 weeks more.
No doubt.
Therefore, I am compelled to use all available personnel.
But no officers, except in an administrative capacity.
Next is Noriyuki Pat Morita. He was a comedian and actor of Japanese descent. His most well-known performance is as Mr. Miyagi in the Karate Kid movie series. The other memorable roles of his are Captain Sam Park on the sitcom MASH and Arnold Takahashi on Happy Days.
Leg up. Huh? Curfew, 5 minutes. Weber, you kissing my pinball machine?
No, I'm doing lip-ups.
Oh, I thought you were doing something weird.
I'm Bert Collins, Jack Smith's assistant. Which one of you guys is fearless? Are you fearless?
No, I chicken.
The third one is Tohoru Masamune. He is a Japanese-American actor best remembered for his role as Shredder in Michael Bay's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Following with Kiko Ajena, an actress, she is mostly known for playing Lane Kim in Gilmore
Why are you living in my
Girls.
house? What house? That house right there. It's mine. What are you doing there?
I'm staying there.
Why? Are we related?
I hope not.
How do you know Mrs. Kim?
I'm exchange student from Seoul. I'm here for 3 months and Mrs. Kim is my host.
Exchange student, huh?
Yes.
After discussing about the Japanese descent actors and the Japanese stereotype in the movies, let's further talk about the influence of Japanese culture that has affected the media, especially in the film industry. The first example is in the movie called Kill Bill. This is a modern classic about revenge, with Uma Thurman's bride character embarking on a bloody quest for a revenge against the titular Bill after he shoots her and put her in a coma. The film is heavily influenced by martial arts and samurai films of the 1970s. Next come from one of the most popular sci-fi movie franchise of all time, Star Wars. The movie itself was influenced by the film The Hidden Fortress and Seven Samurai, directed by Akira Kurosawa. George Lucas stole not only the plot but also the heroic Jedi sequences with their long cloaks and robes reminiscent of Japanese Buddhist monks. Darth Vader's costume and helmet were inspired by the clothing and headgear worn by Japanese warlords. The next one is the highly popular Resident Evil films franchise, which is based on the Japanese video game company Capcom. Japanese culture, like film franchises, has had an impact on the video game industry. Japan has a special talent for improving on American-made products. Indeed, Zelda and Mario are two Japanese video game icons that are likely to come to mind first when you think of video games. The Game Boy and PlayStation consoles, which are common in American homes, are made in Japan. The Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES, was released in America 2 years after the Famicom in Japan in the 1980s. More than 60 million units were sold. By the end of the decade, the Game Boy had once again transformed the home console market. Japanese role-playing games, or JRPGs, differ significantly from Western role-playing games, or WRPGs. For example, the emphasis in JRPGs is on the plots and characters rather than the gameplay. Pokémon is a JRPG that has completely surprised everyone. This monster-catching video game franchise, which debuted in 1996, has grown to become the most popular in the world. It was valued at more than $100 billion. This demonstrated the effectiveness of Japanese brands. Otaku is Japanese slang for being at home. It is a 1980s term used to describe a specific group of young adults who avoid traditional relationships in favor of gaming, watching anime, and reading manga. Japanese anime also had major influence in America as teenagers started to have interest to watching them, such as Dragon Ball Z, Detective Conan, and Spirited Away. The last topic we are going to cover today is influential Japanese food. Sushi is probably what comes to mind when most people think of Japanese cuisine. However, Japanese cuisine consists of much more than just raw fish served with rice. Japanese cooks who brought their own cuisine were among the early immigrants, arriving around the middle of the 19th century. As American culture became more familiar with Japanese culture over time, Japanese cuisine began to gain popularity by the late 1960s. By the end of 1990s, sushi restaurants in America had multiplied due to sushi's low price and simple preparation. Sushi replaced fast food because it was thought to be healthier and more nutritious. It became an essential in Japanese restaurants. Sushi is now available in supermarkets as a quick snack or grab-and-go food. Apart from sushi, there were a lot of other famous Japanese dishes to recommend, such as sashimi, fresh raw fish or meat sliced into thin pieces and often eaten with soy sauce. Ramen, a noodle soup composed using just 4 ingredients: wheat flour, salt, water, and kansui, or the salt water. Tempura, which uses a traditional style of cooking that includes deep frying seafood or vegetables that have been covered in a thin batter prepared from soft cake flour and cold water. And last but not least, recently, matcha powder has become widely used as an ingredient in baked goods, desserts, and matcha drinks like lattes. Matcha's success comes in part from its reputation as a healthier alternative.
That's it for the video, and thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.